Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Today is another fine day, and you're probably all thinking, this is getting a little bit stale. Me walking down the same sidewalk, the same path, talking about similar things with the sun shining. But rest assured, things are going to change. The weather's coming. As you can see, I'm wearing a bit of a hoodie here. Things are not as warm as they were even when I started this journey a couple weeks ago, and this is why I'm just basically going to get into something here that's, as I go through this journey, I learn, I talk to other people, some that are retired, some that aren't. I do some reading and research, and all of you know that, from a kind of a mathematical background of electrical engineering perspectives, I always like to research and study and understand kind of the foundation, how everything works. So I'm always researching and reading. But today I want to talk about something that's a little bit different. And after this, I know I'm heading out to meet up with a friend of mine named Brian, who is a good friend of mine. He's the other gentleman that actually departed from this organization that I currently walked away from. And so we've been good friends since. We chat almost every day. We have regular meetings because we have very similar interests, and our side hustles are very much aligned. So we'll talk about that another day. But the big thing I want to kind of get into before I go meet up with Brian is this whole idea of retirement. And for some people, I know some of the issues that people have. It's a sense of finality. It's a sense of, this is it. It's the finish line. This is it. This is the end of the road. There's no turning back. There's, all these thoughts of, hey, once I pull the trigger, this is it. Like, I've made that commitment. I've made that decision. And it's kind of interesting because that's not necessarily the way it has to be. And so what I would suggest, and I've been, again, kind of following along and researching and all this other jazz, before you really get into the idea of, both feet first into retirement, you might want to think about a bit of a space, a time, a gap year. Think about a gap year that might represent kind of like, I know my daughter, for example, wanted to go to college, but after high school needed a year to travel and take some time away and sort of self-reflect. And this isn't uncommon. You hear about that all the time. And I would almost suggest doing something like that before you say, I'm all in. Or you can be committed. I mean, once you pull the trigger from your company, it's kind of done. Whether it's intentional, whether you decide to retire and you give the formal notice, or whether you're thrust into formal retirement because the company you worked for decided they were going to replace you or eliminate you or your job, and as a result you're sort of forced into it unexpectedly. That's a harder situation because you're not really planning. In theory, the way I see this, kind of, you should be sort of planning all your life. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you're starting to build, but you should always be thinking about putting a little money away, invested money, and spend money a little bit more wisely. Have fun, 100%, but definitely think about possibly, investments, TFSAs, RSPs, 401ks for those in the US and that. And start thinking about some of these smaller investments and start that program in your 20s and 30s. Keep going, pushing. The more you can put in there, the better it's going to, protect you later on in life. And then once you're sort of in your 40s and 50s, you really want to start thinking about looking at the numbers. Where am I at? Make those adjustments. Add a little if you need. Talk to some accountants or financial people, financial advisors, and maybe they can give you a hand with trying to navigate where you're going to be, estimate based on your assumed life expectancy and kind of what you're thinking that might look like. And so once you're at that point, you definitely want to think about where am I at? Am I on target? On all those respective things. Do I have the amount of cash flow I'm going to need with, again, depending on the country you're coming from. And some countries don't give retirement until 60, some 65, like Canada, and you get CPP, old age security later yet. And of course, some countries, I understand Australia being at 67, it's definitely, they're pushing those numbers higher and higher all the time. And I'll be honest, one of the worst things is you're planning for a country that might be 65 today, and all of a sudden you get the wrong government in place, and all of a sudden they push it up to 70. I mean, I think that happened, don't quote me, not 70, but I think, was it France? I think their leadership, and I'm not getting into politics. This isn't about politics. I don't even like politics, honestly. It's kind of nauseating with all of the polarizing silliness that's going on today. I don't even like to get into it, but all I know is how it impacts us. That's what I care about. And so, yeah, I heard they basically pushed out, or wanted to push out, the retirement age. So if you're on target and you're planning, and then the government pulls a rug out from under you, that's a different story. But basically what I'm saying is, you plan your target, you plan your escape route, ideally, unless you're thrust into it. And even if you're thrust into it, if you've been loosely planning through your 40s and 50s, and you've been investing since you started working, then even if you're launched into it, you might have to make a few quick calls, you might have to have a few quick meetings, with accountants or financial planners at your bank or whatever. But you'll have a pretty good sense of where you're at. So that's always an underlying thing. You always want to be doing that. But the one thing I realized is it's nice to have that year gap to say whether you're thrust into it or whether you're not. Just look, I gave my notice, I'm retired, but I don't really need to worry about a lot. The money's there, understand that part. But don't, the whole planning idea, where am I going? What am I doing? I'm going to do a certain amount of traveling. Am I going to do house renovations? Am I going to pick up a new hobby? Am I going to do all these things? Monday I'm going to do this, Tuesday I'm going to do that, Wednesday I'm going to do this. I mean, those are all sort of long-term plans with also that you'd usually include with your better half. But when you do all of that, that's planning. You're planning your schedules, you're planning your days, you're planning your weeks and months. And for that first year, you just came out of a busy life, doing 9 to 5, maybe many cases, a lot more than that. And so why rush into all of a sudden move right into a world of plan again? I do believe that leaving that year of that gap, almost like the college kids, leaving that space to sort of just float around, do what I'm doing. Hey, I'm drinking my coffee every day. Maybe this is my year gap, not intentionally, but I'm sort of doing this. And I hear that it's actually a very popular thought process to be intentional about that. Intentionally saying, I don't need to be anywhere that quickly. Sure, there's some things I'll do on a day-to-day basis, and if it pops up, you deal with it. But to plan out what the rest of your life looks like, take that time away. Don't bother. Just relax, enjoy. I mean, you spent the last better part of 30, 35, 40 years working your butt off, and now you're going to get back into it and go down this planning schedule route again and get it all dialed in. Those things are good to have, but it's also kind of nice to take a little time off. So that's one thing I've sort of been kind of toying with myself here as well, is, the idea of giving myself a little bit of that breathing space and that time to think about some of the other things. And in my case, I kind of need it anyway. In many cases, I'm not the only one. A lot of you guys are reaching out and saying, yeah, your mom, your dad passed away at these ages. Then you're stuck, sort of cleaning things up and figuring everything out. And I'm in that same situation. So often that year, and I know in my case, it all just sort of unraveled this way. I'm spending the good part of this year anyway, just working my way, dealing with the affairs. As the estate lead here, I have to take care of all of that stuff. So often you're just dealing with things in life and you're transitioning. Take your time about it. And here's the other piece. You can retire, but doesn't mean you formally, that's it. I mean, I've talked to so many people, and my old man was the same way. he retired and took a couple of years off and golfed and this and that. Then got bored, drove my mom nuts, and then went back to work. Just because you retire doesn't mean you can't necessarily start that over again and go back to partial work. And I'm not the biggest advocate for that. I do believe staying busy and staying productive, as well as side hustles, are a good way, or even a part-time casual job is a good way to close those financial gaps. If maybe you don't have the entire amount, but you need an extra, say, I could use an extra $1,000 a month. Maybe you don't need that full-time job, and you don't want to go back to that full-time job because we know the grind isn't good for health and wealth and well-being. Plus, you give it all away from taxes anyway, because once you start working full-time, you push up into the upper tax brackets and you end up giving it all away to the government. So I guess what I'll say is, you might need an extra $1,000, maybe an extra couple grand. That side hustle, maybe you got to work at some, little job here, a corner store or something, and work a couple days a week, and it might total up and get you what you need to close the gap. And so you might be just working through that and understanding that transition period and testing the waters and seeing what you need and what you don't need. And it's a good way to start living the life too, during that first year. It allows you to think about the day-to-day and slowly figure out, okay, I don't need to eat as much. I don't need to spend as much here. I'm not using the gas in the vehicle anymore because I'm not driving nearly as far. So I'm saving here, saving here, saving here. This is more like what retirement reality is all about. And it's a good place to sample without getting too deep into planning and all of that. It just gives you that gap and that buffer space to kind of think about all those things. And I think it's important to do that anyway, just for mental health sakes, after getting, crushed under toxic workplaces that some people do, or even not. A lot of people love their work, but sometimes it is just time to leave, but you need that time to sort of wind down and relax, kick back and take it easy for, again, I think a year is a good time. Doesn't mean you never go back to work. I'm not an advocate. I think staying busy and working on some kind of, whether it's again, part-time job or side hustle, that's good. Make a little extra money, that's great. What I'm saying is the full-time, permanent 9 to 5, 40-hour a week job, the grind. That's what you don't really, that's the thing that's not doing, health a whole lot of good. So, again, do things that make you feel productive, and if it earns you a few extra bucks, hey, that's great, because you're still doing it on your terms, and that's the beauty. So again, don't feel that it's the end of the road and when it's right, because that's kind of how I used to see it. And now the more I kind of see, you don't really need to be that serious about it. As long as you've been doing your investments and savings, and even if you need that extra top up, sure, get that casual part-time job, that's fine. But just be ready to move on and enjoy life, because life is short. And there's so many people, like I said, that I've heard that after a year or two, they just retire and then they're gone. And it just saddens me, because it's so sad when you think a person works hard, paying bills, paying taxes, being that great citizens to society, and then they don't make it anywhere to actually enjoy their own personal time. And I think it's important that we all do that we all enjoy some time. I mean, you got to work, retiring at 30, there's a point where it sort of has to make sense, at least for most people. There are people that can do that way early, but generally speaking, most people have to sort of grind it out at least kind of late 40s, 50, 55. Those are kind of early retirements, and most people, at least, they kind of put in their time and they spend that time, and then it's time to take that break. So really, my message today is, it's a purely positive one. I look at every day as a new challenge, a new beautiful day, sun shining. And I know in 2 months from now, there's going to be snow on the ground, and I'll be like slushing along. I may not even be doing these same walks. I might go somewhere else or do shorter trips. But I definitely want to expose you all to all the seasons too. I mean, why not? This is what it's all about. I mean, We don't, you know, we don't live in Hawaii here. We don't live in southern, you know, in Florida. So this is what a good part of North America is about. You know, Canada and northern states in the US all feel these 4 seasons. And so I'm going to carry you guys all through my journey, and doing so, you're going to get a sample of what I do and how I do it. And of course, through the weather, the respective weather, which no point in hiding it. It is what it is. This is perfect. I love it. And I love summer. I love spring and fall. And I love winter too, because it's a nice break. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think you need that time right there? Just, if you don't mind, drop a note. I'd like to hear your ideas there. Do you feel you need that time, or are you pretty much ready to get right into it? Love to hear it. Hope to see each and every one of you in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.